How do you take one of the most complex, tragic, and genuinely impressive leaders in all of Tolkien's legendarium and turn him into a guy who eats tomatoes like a war crime? And why does nobody seem to realize that the real Denethor might have been the most formidable human being in Middle-earth? And that includes Aragorn? Okay, I need to talk about this. Because what Peter Jackson did to Denethor is, in my humble and correct opinion, the single worst character assassination in the entire trilogy. Yes, worse than Faramir. Yes, worse than Gimli being reduced to comic relief. Denethor got done so unbelievably dirty that most people who've only seen the films have no idea they're looking at a butchered version of one of Tolkien's most fascinating creations. And honestly, it kind of makes me furious. So let's get into it. Let me set up what the movies show you first, because I want you to feel comfortable before I pull the rug. You watch Return of the King, and you see Denethor, played by John Noble, and credit where it's due. Noble is acting his absolute heart out with the material he's given. And what you see is essentially a villain, a petty, greasy, half-mad tyrant who favors one son over the other, refuses to light the beacons, sends Faramir on a suicide mission, eats cherry tomatoes in the most aggressively disgusting way cinema has ever captured, and then tries to burn his not-yet-dead son alive before doing a flaming sprint off the edge of Minas Tirith. And look, as a movie character, he works. He's effective. You hate him. You're supposed to hate him. John Noble makes your skin crawl every second he's on screen, and that Pippin singing scene intercut with Faramir's charge is genuinely one of the most devastating sequences in the trilogy. Cinematically, it's brilliant. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But here's the thing. Here's what kills me. That character, that greasy, cowardly, irrational man, that's not Denethor. That's a cartoon drawn on top of Denethor. And the real one, the book version, is so much more interesting, so much more tragic, and so much more terrifying that it almost feels like Jackson adapted a completely different character. So let me tell you about the real Denethor. In the books, Denethor II is described by Tolkien himself in Appendix A as a proud man, tall, valiant, and more kingly than any man that had appeared in Gondor for many lives of men. Let that sink in. More kingly. Tolkien says the blood of the Dunedain ran almost true in him, which, in this world, means he was physically and mentally superior to nearly every other human alive. He was learned in lore, far-sighted, wise in strategy, and basically ran Gondor with an iron fist of competence for decades, while the shadow of Mordor grew darker every single year. This man was not a coward. This man was not incompetent. This man was, by virtually every metric Tolkien gives us, extraordinary. And here's a detail the movies completely erase. Denethor lit the beacons. In the book, it's on his orders that the warning fires are lit, and Gondor's allies are summoned. There's no dramatic scene of Gandalf whispering to Pippin while the grumpy steward refuses to act. Denethor was already acting. He had already prepared the defense of Osgiliath. He had already positioned his forces. He had already called for aid. The man was a strategic military mind who had been preparing for this war for years, while Aragorn was, and I say this with love for Aragorn, wandering around the north being mysterious. And when Pippin first meets Denethor in the books, listen to what Tolkien writes. Pippin looks at him and thinks that Denethor looked much more like a great wizard than Gandalf did, more kingly, beautiful, and powerful, and older. More like a wizard than Gandalf. That's the impression this man makes on people. He radiates power, he radiates authority. And when Gandalf comes into his hall, Denethor doesn't cower or grovel or act like a petulant child. He goes toe-to-toe with a Maya in verbal combat and basically holds his own. Pippin describes watching the two of them talk as feeling the strain between them, almost as if he saw a line of smouldering fire drawn from eye to eye that might suddenly burst into flame. That's not the dynamic of a pathetic old man and a superior wizard. That's two titans measuring each other. So what happened? What broke this extraordinary man? And this is where the story gets genuinely tragic, because Tolkien gives us layers and layers, and the movies strip every single one away. It starts with Thorongill. Decades before the War of the Ring, a mysterious northern ranger arrived in Gondor under the name Thorongil, which, spoiler, was Aragorn operating under an alias. And Ecthelion, Denethor's father, basically fell in love with this guy. Thorongill was brilliant, charismatic, a military genius, and Denethor, the actual heir, the actual son, watched his own father prefer a stranger over him. The jealousy and insecurity this planted were deep and formative. Denethor suspected who Thorongil really was. He suspected the king was going to return one day and take everything his family had held for centuries. And that fear, that perfectly rational, perfectly understandable fear, became the crack that Sauron would eventually exploit. Because here's the thing about the Palantír. In the movies, they barely explain why Denethor has one or what it cost him to use it. In the books, it's everything. Denethor began using the Anor Stone partly out of duty. He genuinely needed intelligence about Sauron's forces, and partly out of that deep-rooted need to surpass Thorongill and Gandalf in knowledge. The Palantír was his edge, his way of proving he was indispensable, and for years it worked. He learned more about the movements of Sauron's forces than anyone else in Middle-earth. His intelligence network was essentially supernatural. But here's the devastating part. Eventually, Sauron became aware that someone was looking through the Anor Stone, and what followed was a years-long psychic battle, a mental siege between Denethor and the Dark Lord himself. And Denethor held. He didn't break the way Saruman broke. The Palantír essay in Unfinished Tales makes this explicitly clear. Denethor was strong-willed enough to resist Sauron's direct domination. The Dark Lord couldn't control him, but what Sauron could do, and did with horrifying precision, was choose what Denethor saw. He showed him the vast armies of Mordor, the fleets from Umbar, the Easterlings, the Haradrim, an endless tide of enemies converging on Gondor from every direction. Everything true, nothing fabricated, just curated. Sauron didn't need to lie to Denethor. He just needed to show him the truth without the hope. And slowly, over years, the knowledge of what was coming, the sheer mathematical certainty of Gondor's destruction, ate Denethor alive from the inside. And that's what makes Book Denethor tragic. He's not an idiot. He's not a coward. He's a brilliant man who was shown too much truth and not enough grace. His despair isn't weakness. It's the logical conclusion of someone who has seen the full scope of what's coming and doesn't have access to the one piece of information that could give him hope, that two hobbits are walking into Mordor with the weapon that could unmake it all. Sauron made sure Denethor never saw that, and so Denethor, operating on the best intelligence available to him, concluded that everything was lost. And honestly, based on what he knew, he was right. This is what makes his death in the books so much more powerful than the slapstick flaming sprint in the movie. In Tolkien's version, Denethor's suicide is a deliberate choice made with full awareness. He doesn't stumble around on fire. He lies down on the pyre holding the Palantír, his greatest tool and his greatest curse, and he tells Gandalf that the West has already fallen, that no one can stand against the shadow. He's wrong, of course, but the tragedy is that he has every reason to believe he's right. And when Gandalf tries to stop him, Denethor delivers one of the most chilling lines in the entire book. He basically tells Gandalf that the wizard has no authority in his house, that he will not be a puppet of other men's designs. Even in his madness, even in his despair, the man has pride. He has dignity. He chooses death on his own terms rather than submission to either Sauron or Gandalf. That's not a pathetic character, that's a Shakespearean one. And the Thorongill angle makes it even more heartbreaking when you zoom out, because think about what Aragorn's return means from Denethor's perspective. His entire life, Denethor has held Gondor together. He has fought the Long War. He has sacrificed his mental health using the Palantír. He has sent his sons to fight and die. He has carried the weight of an entire civilization on his shoulders. And now, at the very end, some Northern Ranger, the same Northern Ranger whose shadow has haunted Denethor since his youth, is going to waltz in and claim the throne, take the crown that the stewards have been keeping warm for centuries. Denethor's resentment toward Aragorn isn't pettiness. It's the bitterness of a man who did everything right and still lost to someone destiny apparently liked better. What I also think the films miss completely is how Denethor functions as a mirror for Gandalf and Aragorn's own temptations. Gandalf refuses the ring because he knows power would corrupt him. Aragorn, in the books, accepts his kingship because he's been prepared for it. Denethor is what happens when someone equally capable takes a different path, when they reach for forbidden knowledge, when they try to do everything themselves, when they refuse to trust in anything beyond their own strength. He's not a villain. He's a cautionary tale. He's what Gandalf could have been. He's what Aragorn could have been, and Tolkien treats him with the gravity that deserves. Now, I understand why Jackson simplified him. You have 3 hours. You need a clear antagonist in Minas Tirith. You need the audience to feel the dysfunction of Gondor's leadership so that Aragorn's arrival feels like salvation. Giving Denethor the full book treatment, the competence, the strategic brilliance, the slow, tragic corruption, would take an entire film on its own. And the eating scene, as much as I despise what it does to the character, is undeniably effective cinema when paired with Pippin's song and Faramir's charge. Billy Boyd composed and sang that himself, by the way, and it might be the most emotionally devastating 60 seconds in the whole trilogy. So yeah, the movie version works, I won't deny that. But it works by sacrificing something irreplaceable: complexity. Movie Denethor is someone you hate. Book Denethor is someone you grieve. And I know which version I find more powerful. So the next time you watch Return of the King and you see that greasy, snarling, cherry tomato murdering lunatic on his throne, just know you're looking at a man who held the mind of a literal dark god at bay for decades, who kept an entire kingdom alive through sheer force of will, and who was ultimately destroyed not by weakness, but by seeing too clearly a truth he was never meant to bear alone. That's not a villain. That's a tragedy. And Peter Jackson owes him an apology.